Hello, and welcome to the Multilingual World podcast. If, like me, you're fascinated by language and languages, you've probably asked yourself questions like, how multilingual is the world? Where are the world estimated 7,000 languages spoken? And which countries have the lion's share? How is this wealth of linguistic diversity managed by individuals, groups, and governmental authorities through language policies? And what are the consequences of such choices? Why do people stop speaking and transmitting their heritage languages and shift to dominant languages? What can we do to stop the 60 to 90% of the world's languages from disappearing? To explore these questions and many more, I will be interviewing influential academics and multilingual speakers living in Manchester to discuss aspects of multilingualism in different parts of the world, dispel the myths of inferior and primitive languages, and most importantly, we will discuss how language science contributes to improving access to better education and health, and how central it is to socioeconomic development and to fight social inequalities. I'm Dr. Serge Sagna. I'm a lecturer in linguistics at the University of Manchester, and I'm very excited to welcome you to the Multilingual World podcast. So let's look at the linguistic features, because you have your classification, which is based on scientific research that, including historical evidence, linguistic historical evidence, and other types of evidence. Now, when you want to look at the features themselves, when you look at the different varieties, of Afro-Caribbean Creoles, what can you tell us? Can you give us examples of some of the, let's say, properties that, we can look at and basically think, okay, I don't know if you can actually, maybe you can show examples, but you can, give us examples as we speak.
Yes, I can. So there are several things. One is lexical evidence. So we're using the classical mechanisms of, comparative linguistics.
So for non-linguists, we can say it's like vocabulary, right?
Vocabulary.
Yeah.
The lexicon and vocabulary.
Yeah.
For example, we have a range of maybe around 40, 50 items from languages that are of African origin, but from languages in an area from northern Senegal or southern Mauritania, if you count, the Atlantic languages spoken in Mauritania,
Yeah.
up to Angola in one linguistic system.
In one linguistic system, in one of the
in all spread out through all the varieties of African Caribbean English Creole. So, for example, you have a verb like chuk. Yes.
Yeah,
Do you speak
yeah.
Fula?
Huh?
Do you speak Fula?
No, I know a few words, but not really.
Yeah.
Chuk, for me, in my language, is an idiophone, which basically is,
Pierce.
piercing. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. So it comes as
with
an
a sharp, with something that has a sharp,
sharp edge,
pointy end.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, yeah.
You find it in all the varieties of the Afro-Caribbean English.
So from Nigerian Pidgin to Jamaican Creole.
Everywhere is chuk.
Everywhere is chuk.
A term like nyang or nyam.
Nyam, yes, eat.
Food in Wolof, right?
Yeah. Nyam,
But,
nyam. Oh, yeah, there's the word nyam. Okay, in one of the one that comes to mind now is to taste, but in Fula, nyam is like to eat. If I'm, yeah. I wonder if it's the same in Sere. I'm not gonna say I don't understand Sere, but yeah. Yeah. But it has to do with ingesting food or something. Food related.
In Antongo, you say me and nyang, I'm eating. In Jamaican Creole, in some varieties, it's nyam.
Nyam.
Right? That term, so here, maybe in some older varieties of Creole as well, I don't know. That's something that I would have to ask Ian Hancock, who knows very well about the lexicon, the older layers of the lexicon of Creole. So something mental note with. Then there are terms, like konkonsa, which is from Akan, which is to gossip, konkonsa.
I know
Tree
it
is
from
konkonsa,
Cameroonian. Kongosa, le Kongosa.
kongosa. So you have reflexes, which is different variations of that word. Of course, the sounds change, words change over time, but you'll recognize them. Now, suddenly that's from tree, from Akan, from Ghana. How's that?
Yes.
Right?
Yes. Yes.
Right? And so forth. You have terms from Kikongo, right down in Angola, right? And so forth. So we are talking about a set of items, lexical items of words.
Yes.
That come from a stretch that is probably 8,000 to 10,000 kilometers long.
So the whole coast of West Africa, like
Yes.
of the African continent, almost like the western part, mostly the western part.
Yeah, only the western part. Yeah.
Sorry.
Right. So it's very unlikely that these languages picked up these terms by chance, each of them separately from Ghana, from Angola, and from Mauritania.
Of course. And you find all those terms both in. So if we come back to actually the classification that you made earlier, so you can find them in West African, pidgins, and both in the, Caribbean. We have to repeat that again for people to remember.
Exactly.
Yeah. Okay.
Then we also find grammatical aspects, for example, like we have an imperfective, perfective opposition rather than a tense, like very strong tense. We have tense markers, but we have more of an aspect prominent system. So what does that mean? A language that privileges aspect rather than tense in the expression of time relations is a language which doesn't always need to make a difference between, for example, if I say I am eating in English, there's automatically imperfective. I'm doing it right now. It's progressive, so it's going on. But it also positions me in the present.
Yes.
Not in the present, I have to say I was eating. Right? So when he came, I was eating.
Yeah.
When so he came in, no, sorry, yeah. When he came, I was eating. But right now I am eating.
Yeah.
In an aspect prominent language, usually you don't always have to put the time reference there. So you can say in Pichi, where the man enter. So when the man enter, where the man enter, I did chop. So when the man entered, I am eating, which doesn't make sense from the English point of view.
From English point of view, yeah.
Because you need it. But basically, where the man enter, I did chop. And then the person could call me, Kofi, what thing you they do? What are you doing? I say, I did chop. I'm eating. Right? Because the reference time has already been established earlier in discourse, so I don't need any tense markers.
Okay.
Right? That's aspect prominence. That's something that you find everywhere, including the markers. So in Sranantongo, you say mi enyang, e de,
so the
a or de, exactly. Formerly, it was de. We know that from earlier phases. It was de.
So de, a de, and then here mi e.
Exactly. Mi
So
enyang.
the a and the de are actually the a originates from de basically.
Exactly.
Okay.
Right?
Yeah.
Jamaican. Mi, mi anyang. I think it's nyang as well. I don't speak Jamaican, but mi anyang, mi a. So there's de, da. You have a variety. But in some varieties, for example, the one spoken by our colleague Joseph Ferguson, who I think is from Montego Bay, if I'm not mistaken. I hope I'm not doing him injustice here. You know how Jamaicans can be local patriots a lot, but I think he's from Montego Bay. And in his variety, or at least from the western part of it, and in his variety, I think they say he can also say midenyang. Right?
Okay.
There again, too much similarity. And then, of course, in Nigerian Pidgin, are they chop?
Yes.
In Pichi, they chop.
Are
And then Pidgin,
go.
are they chop? Creole, are they eat?
Are they
right?
eat?
And so forth.
Yeah, 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 yeah.
This is very obvious that these markers share common.
So they first show words, vocabulary, let's say to be a bit naive, and then some grammatical features.
And grammar, exactly.
Yeah, yeah. Okay, so that's like, you know, again, reinforcing that link that you were making from the beginning, you know, that we have a language cluster and we can see it in different, you know, at different points, you know, even in the linguistic, you know, feature. We mentioned Pichi a lot, and you did a PhD on Pichi. I think we're not doing justice to your work by not like having, you know, at least a few words of Pichi. Where is Pichi spoken? You show it on the map, but let's remind our, you know, audience, what is Pichi, where is spoken, and a little bit about what you did on it.
Yes, so Pichi is spoken on the island of Bioko,
Mm-hmm.
here in the Gulf of Guinea.
Yeah,
And, believe me, it was such an eerie experience for me. In 2016, I was on the opposite side in Cameroon, in Buea.
yeah,
Sorry, in Limbe. Limbe
uh-huh,
is the coastal town here on the
yeah,
coast. And I was having a fish with a very nice gentleman who I'd gotten to know in my hotel. And he invited me to have a nice grilled fish on the shores of the Atlantic.
yeah.
We're having our nice conversation, and I see those lights in the background. I'm like, wait a minute, what are those lights? And he says, that's Malabo, the capital of Equatorial Guinea on the island of Bioko. So you can actually see it from Cameroon. That's how close it is.
Wow, okay, okay.
And of course, regrettably, the problem in Africa, hard borders. If this was
Yeah.
Asia, Indonesia, or China, you just hop into a ferry and go say hello to your folks,
Yes,
and come
exactly.
back. Same day,
Yeah, 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 yeah.
You have to go to Yaoundé to get a visa and then fly over for $500.
$500. Wow.
Oh, yeah. Anyway, small anecdotes. But so Pichi is spoken in Equatorial Guinea, is historically an offshoot quite clearly of Creole.
Mm-hmm.
I wrote a grammatical description of Pichi based on a large corpus of data that I collected during 3 field research trips to Equatorial Guinea in 2003, 2005, and 2007. So quite a while back. And yeah, it hadn't been described before. There was anecdotal information about the language, a very early, very brief language manual from the early 20th century, late 19th century. So that was the first kind of scientific description of the language. Yeah.
Mm.
And it was an interesting experience. When I first landed, so Equatorial Guinea is a former Spanish colony, the only
Yes.
one of Africa south of the Sahara. And Spanish is spoken, widely spoken in Equatorial Guinea, more and more actually, as a second or even first language. And so there's a lot of mixing between Pichi and Spanish, which makes the language extremely interesting and beautiful to hear because there's a lot of unexpected things for the ears of somebody who knows varieties like Nigerian Pidgin or Ghanaian Pidgin,
Uh-huh.
right? All the numbers are in Spanish,
Or the
except
numbers, the counting. So when they're counting, they count in Spanish.
they count in Spanish, or you can say something like, you would have low numbers in Pichi. You would say, give me 2, give me
Yeah.
3. But then from 4, 5 onward, give me 4, give me 5. You know?
Uh-huh.
Or you'd say, you know, uh, who's then Kofi go come, or who's day Kofi go come back? When is Kofi going to come back? Who's then Kofi go come back? I think it's on miércoles. I think it's on Wednesday. I think it's on Sabbath.
So the
Yeah,
days of the week in Spanish.
exactly. Right? Days of the week, calendar units, all these things. But of course, you know that from the Casamance, I mean, a lot of the kind of scholarly, the stuff that's acquired in schools. And here again, we're going to language policy. I mean, of course, if you have a continent in which no intellectual, academic activity outside of the small family sphere takes place in an African language,
Yes.
you are going to get numbers, mathematics, all kinds of academic discourse in the colonizer's language, whether you like
Yes,
it
of course, of course, of course.
or
You see
different in
it in
Senegal.
everyday you see it in everyday speech. Look, even if you're counting mentally, at some point the colonial language takes over. So yeah.
I just think that in some languages, this kind of multilectal or monolectal code switching, as I think Mewis and Blomet called it in one article when they were looking at the way Congolese diasporans in Brussels use Lingala and French. These are really integrated systems, and I have a whole chapter on code switching in the grammar, but really, there's a very, very smooth and fluid way of dealing with this Spanish words and structures that kind of are really part of the language system. They're an intrinsic part of the language system. They are not, in many instances, I doubt that speakers are really code switching. I would rather say they have a kind of monolectal grammar that incorporates at least two language systems, if not three, including Bube, which is the Bantu language spoken by a large part of the population of Bioko Island.
Okay.
Right?
Okay.
But it's more obvious with Spanish. The influence of Bube is more covert in terms of linguistic structures, grammar, but not in terms of lexicon. Because you switch with the prestigious language. You don't
Yes.
switch with the lower ideologically demoted language.
Demoted language, exactly. Yeah. That was my next question, actually. What happens, what phenomena do you observe when you have a situation where you have a pidgin, or Creole, whatever you want to call it, like let's say Creole in Sierra Leone, in contact with, like, the official language being English. In the case of Equatorial Guinea, you have Spanish, but if I'm not mistaken, Spanish is not the only official language.
Yeah, I mean,
But it's,
officially it's
it's
French
but
and
it's the dominant
Portuguese.
one. It's the dominant one.
Yeah, official is just an official. De facto, it's only Spanish.
De facto, it's only
De
Spanish.
jure, de jure, you also have French and Portuguese as
Exactly.
core.
That's what I was. Yeah, yeah. And you have,
Those were political gestures to get closer to other members of the Central African community and kind of
yeah.
enhance relationships with Portuguese and French-speaking French
Mm,
language neighbors. Yeah.
yeah. So you would have, for example, Barbadian Creole and English. The question was, and you answered, I think most of it with Pichi as an example. What happens when you have, an official language and one of these pigeons? If the lexifier language is the official language, that's one thing. But if the official language is not, like in the case of it, that is when it becomes interesting, and that's what you were describing earlier, right?
Yes, yes. No, you've raised a very important point. So in a paper in 2017, I suggested a model of Creole language change. And here I'm talking about post-formative. I don't engage in debates really a lot about how these languages emerged. We don't have enough historical evidence. It's a bit of a futile discussion. We talked about it already in terms of Pidgin to Creole cycle and all,
Yeah,
right?
yeah,
So
yeah, 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 yeah.
discussion closed. What is much more interesting in my view, and this is of course my own personal research thrust, so that's why I find it more interesting. Others find the historical aspects more interesting. In my personal view, what is more interesting is to see what is happening with these languages in terms of their differentiation, these varieties, how they're differentiating, how this big cluster of African Caribbean English Creole has been diverging or converging. Because we are seeing in vitro really how a language in fast forward, right? This is a language that crystallized out of English and other varieties just recently, 300 years ago. In fact, the varieties of West Africa are even more recent. And we are seeing that process take place before our very eyes with the incredibly rapid change, linguistic change that is taking place in Nigerian Pidgin, for example, nowadays, where we have a world of a difference between somebody who is 60 years old speaking Nigerian Pidgin and somebody who's 15.
Yes, yes,
Right?
yes.
These are differences that, of course, we find only fascinating because we are used to the standard language development model. What is that? The standard language development model is what happens in heavily standardized languages. German, Portuguese, French, Chinese, standard Arabic maybe also, right? Also, and so forth. Chiefly the European languages, but not exclusively. China also has a very strong standardizing ideology. What is that standard model? Well, you whip it down, you whip it into children in school that when you say, my father his house is wrong, it has to be my father's house. You make them feel guilty.
Yes.
That they're using my father his house.
Or scared. It's not just
Scared.
guilty. If
You beat them.
Yes. That's
Or
what
you
we know.
demote them. Or you tell them they are rubbish. They don't know how to talk.
Yeah.
So this is standard language ideology.
Not intelligent.
You're not intelligent, and so
Yes.
forth.
Yeah.
You do that long enough across generations, then you have very deeply entrenched and internalized an inner policeman.
Yes.
And that inner policeman is always watching your speech. And in fact, you are no longer free. You cannot speak without self-monitoring.
Yes.
That's the end of your linguistic creativity.
I mean, that's very, very present, sorry to interrupt, but among Francophones.
Oh, even more than among Anglophones. Because we Anglophones, at least, we have our Pidgin.
Exactly. In the French, we speak with the subjunctive imparfait.
But in French, you guys, the colonial control is more vicious. But you haven't seen the Portuguese-speaking countries of West Africa. That one is beyond imagination. I mean, that's even more. Oh, man, we can talk about that in a moment because I'm doing research in Angola at the moment, right? So of course, this has to do with different colonial trajectories, with different types of language policies that were installed, but also with different standardizing traditions already that were imported from Europe. The standardizing tradition of France is much stronger than that of England.
Yes.
Stronger than that of Germany.
Yes, of course, yeah.
Or a country like Norway, which was not a colonizer, but in Norway, they have a very lax standardizing tradition. There's a huge tolerance for the use of regiolects, local dialects in formal situations. Right? So what happens, of course, is when you have a standard language that is manipulated and engineered to such an extent, language change progresses very slowly, in snail's pace. In fact, in a chapter that I wrote for Yaron Matras's language contact volume in 2020, I call it fossilization, language fossilization. The language becomes like a fossil. But actual normal living languages don't behave like that for nothing.
They're not.
And no language behaves like that.
No.
Apart from standardized languages. So we have to turn the thing from its head to its feet. What is normal language evolution? The Creole is normal language evolution. What is abnormal language evolution? What is abnormal language transmission? What is abnormal? Standard model, the way children acquire French is abnormal.
Yes.
The way children acquire standard Chinese is abnormal. Because it's an acquisition that is driven largely by engineering agendas and by formal institutions. I'm not saying they're not talking Chinese with their parents, but a large part of the grammatical system and the ways of speaking are acquired in formalized contexts, in institutional contexts. And that is not normal. That's exceptional.
Yeah.
At least in the 300,000 human history, it's very exceptional.
Yeah.
Very recent.
Yeah. Very interesting. So let's move to let's say, the spread. So we looked at, how African Caribbean English Creole, well, let's say roughly where they come from, how they related, actually Creoles in terms of varieties. Don't, and if I put the plural, just take it as I'm talking about varieties of
Exactly.
what you describe, as a language cluster, right? Maybe also it's the habit of hearing Creoles that's taking over, but at
No,
least,
but it doesn't matter. We also talk about Englishes
yes, of course, yes, yes, there's
and
that.
Frenches,
French,
right?
French is when, well, yeah. In linguists will talk about it, but the ideology will just like take you a
Something
different
else.
direction, as you know. But but how about the spreading? The question is, when I looked at the population, one thing you say is that the Afro-Caribbean English Creole language cluster has around 150 million speakers. If I remember correctly, 95% of them are African, like Africans, speakers of this, are Africans, and 3/4 are speakers of Nigerian Pidgin.
Indeed. Yes.
So the lion's share of, this language cluster resides in Africa.
Yes.
And
Yes.
yeah, and then I'm thinking, okay, there is a big movement nowadays of, it's not one movement actually. We've seen over the years how reggae music, dancehall, have influenced, the people, let's say, I was gonna say people from African descent, but actually has conquered the world, let's say. Yeah. Now we see a trend with Niger music going the other way in a way, right?
Yes.
So let's look at, like, okay, here is the a diagram that shows the distribution of the thing. But I want you to tell us about the spread. What are the driving forces behind the spread, the current spread, of the variety, and where do you see it going?
Yes. So, I mean, you pointed out that, so we're talking, and here, we need to proceed with caution. We have hardly any language census data. So hardly any data that tells us how many people speak any of these varieties. I think one of the few countries where we have, or two, where we have census data is Jamaica and Suriname. So we have micro census data from Jamaica. So just a small proportion of people, maybe, I don't know how many, but I know that the Jamaica language unit at the University of the West Indies, Mona, did mini surveys. And we have census data from Suriname about the use of Saranang,
Mhm.
where at least half the population declare that they speak Saranang as one of the
Mm.
languages they
Yeah.
speak. But let's be careful. These are ideologically very, very difficult topics to admit that you actually speak a Creole language, that has been vilified by centuries of colonial politics and
Yeah.
anti-African language ideologies and anti-African ideologies, actually. You are not going to easily admit that you speak the language, at least for some generations. It's becoming more and more part and parcel of the identity of younger generations, and to affirm it positively, but it hasn't always been the case. So even census data is sometimes underestimates the real extent of the phenomenon,
Mhm.
right? So that's a caveat. But even careful calculations bring that number up to 150 million speakers on both sides of the Atlantic. And as we can see here from the pie chart,
Yeah.
if you combine Nigerian Pidgin, Cameroon Pidgin, and Ghanaian Pidgin, you're getting 95%, basically.
Yes.
Now, this is a very different picture from what a lot of people are used to knowing, thinking, saying about Creoles, English Creoles. The average person who doesn't know the nitty-gritty and details, as we've been discussing now, would somehow assume that English Creole is somehow associated with the Caribbean.
Mhm. Mhm. Mhm.
right? We think about Jamaican, we think about, Trinidad, Carnival, whatever, right? Jamaican reggae music, Rastafarians, and so forth. Yes, that's true. It shows the disproportionate soft power of Jamaica. It shows that Jamaica is a global cultural superpower.
Yes.
But when we look at the figures, they are much more modest. Jamaican Creole speakers probably not more than between 2 and 3. I mean, 2 in Jamaica and probably another million or so in the diaspora, but not really much more, right?
Yeah.
We're talking about very modest numbers compared to something, a monster like Nigerian Pidgin, which has been estimated recently to be about 110 million speakers,
Yes.
right?
Yeah.
So these are the numbers. So yeah, that tells us a bit about where the action is and
Yeah.
where the main developments
Yeah.
with respect to the future uses, perceptions, developments with African Caribbean English Creole will take place. They will take place in Africa. And the proportion of the Caribbean is likely to shrink further. Firstly, because there's no longer any population demographic growth in the Caribbean. There's actually a decrease in the Caribbean, like much of West. While in Africa, the population is still dramatically growing. So we are thinking about, I made some careful projections based on official UN Population Division figures, projections for the year 2100, and I come up with a figure of around 420 million people, probably speaking African Caribbean English Creole, and 98 or 99% being African. Probably even 99.5% being African.
Wow.
So those are developments where we are probably going to see, we don't know, these are flexible language systems. People are flexible users of these systems.
Yeah.
These languages will change, they will adapt.
Yeah.
Might move closer to West African Englishes. They might go apart more, grow apart. We don't know.
Yeah.
But in any case, this cluster will be one of the largest languages of the Western Hemisphere. That's for sure. And probably among the top 10 of the world by that time. So that's quite an evolution if we consider that the precursor or the precursors of these languages were spoken by a few thousand Africans in chains.
Yes.
On a small Caribbean island with the odds of history supposedly stacked against them.
Against them.
Supposedly, I'm saying.
Yeah. Yes.
Yeah. Within
Because
300 years.
what is interesting here is that the spread of the Afro-Caribbean English Creole is actually the opposite of the spread of European, let's say, languages like French, which happen, let's say, top down, and you say it in your paper, actually. It's a top down, but this one seems to have gathered impetus from the ground and is just like spreading around. So that's the reason for my previous question, right? With the music, I mean, the film industry, Nigeria is producing, a lot of music that's taking over, the world scene in many ways.
Yes.
The film industry is also quite, very, very dynamic. And, there's dynamism in all over. At least culturally, Nigeria is really growing.
Yes.
Look, it's taken over even in my village. My little brothers dance Niger nowadays. It wasn't the case in my
Ethiopia. I mean, I remember traveling in Ethiopia with my students. I mean, even in Ethiopia, and Ethiopians have a very, very, strong national music culture, and also the music is very particular. It's beautiful. They have this, incredibly strong local national music culture. But even in places like Ethiopia, you have Afrobeats being played on the airwaves. In Angola, same. I just came back from Angola. Angola has an incredibly sophisticated national music scene with a variety of incredible music styles. and they are very proud of their music. But even there, you know,
Yes, of course.
you're sitting
Yes.
somewhere in a bar in a corner, and you have Afro beats booming out of
So,
So yeah,
this
so I mean,
spread is happening. Is happening.
I'm happy you raised the point of how languages spread. I mean, we are used once again to the standard model, which kind of says, okay, how do we calculate the power of a language, the strength of a language? Well, you know, we can go back to, I think it was Haugen who said it. I'm not sure. Maybe I'm misquoting him, but in any case, one of our, you know, precursors of our discipline, European linguist from the early century, who said, you know, a language is a dialect with an army and a navy.
Weinrich.
I think it was, I don't think it was
It's,
Weinreich.
it's often attributed to Weinrich. I mean,
I don't think it was Weinreich, honestly.
oh, Weinreich. Okay, I'm mispronouncing. Oh, right.
No, you haven't mispronounced. Forget it. There are different ways of pronouncing it. I mean, I'm probably pronouncing it wrong because he was American, and no American pronounced it the way I'm pronouncing
Yeah.
German.
But
Yeah,
yeah,
so
it's often attributed. But it's true that recently I saw that it was not him. So I was a bit confused because I've always,
yeah, I think it's somebody else. But what this shows, there's truth to this, of course,
there is.
but there's only truth to it within the context of the European standardization enterprise of the 19th century,
Yes.
in which European countries clambered to quickly create their standard languages if they hadn't already done so. For example, the latecomers like the Norwegians and Finnish, they really just basically invented their standard languages. You know, it's usually one or two guys sitting in a smoke-filled room with ties, deciding what to put into a dictionary and into a grammar.
Yeah.
And that was then internalized by generations and generations of learners afterwards, right?
Yeah.
Not very democratic, right? So, so in that sense, this is our language change model. But we forget again that this is not the normal way languages evolve and emerge. The normal way is, again, the way Nigerian Pidgin has emerged. That is, at some point, people start using the language. Maybe it was imported, maybe it wasn't. It becomes a community language, one of several community languages. Speakers transform it on the go. They use it because they like the language. They use it because they feel empowered in the way they can use it. Nobody's telling them how to use it.
Yeah.
They use it for pragmatic purposes because, you know, the market woman in Onitsha or in Port Harcourt needs Pidgin because she wants to trade and make money and feed her children, right? We use it, the two of us, because we are school kids and we love the sound of it, and it's better than English because English is always forced down our throats with stick and carrot. So we prefer to speak Pidgin out of the classroom because it liberates us.
Yeah.
Right? And so forth. So what you have is natural language evolution. That is natural language evolution. And in fact, some authors like Nicholas Faraklas in his chapter in 2021 for the Nigerian Pidgin volume, and Francis Egbokare, and myself in a paper from 2024, we argue that it is in fact the absence of standardization that makes West African Pidgin, Jamaican Creole, Sanantongo so powerful. The malleability of the language, the flexibility, and the possibility for young people and speakers to co-opt it as a language of subversion, identity affirmation, and counterculture. Right? So really the opposite of what we think. We don't even need the state. In fact, probably the state would have messed it up. So that gives us a bit of a problem. We have to accept that self-criticism also as linguists, where we have to protect languages. We have to make sure that these languages are transmitted. We have to develop orthographies. We have to make sure that the kids continue speaking it, that there's a kind of formal transmission outside of the family to strengthen the language. We have to use it as a medium of class instruction. Is that really always the case? Or are there other ways of promoting African languages or marginalized languages everywhere in the world that involve popular culture?
Yeah.
You know, that involve music, that involve
use, like, you know, the kind of
the informal practices
But like agency from like,
Validating them. Yes,
yeah,
validating the agency and the informal practices. Exactly.
yeah. I mean, talking about minority languages, there's one that came to mind which we didn't mention at all, which is quite close geographically to me,
Yes,
Aku from Gambia.
yes.
I think did I see somewhere that it has something, maybe it's in your paper again, maybe 14,000 speakers around that, quite a small figure.
Very small figure. We don't know exactly how many. And I've honestly, that's a real gap in my knowledge and also in my trajectory. I've never been to Gambia. I have to go to Banjul, and I really would like to see how many people actually still use it, whether the Creoles, the Akus
Yeah, I
of
was wondering how dynamic it is locally. I go through the Gambia, but I rarely hear,
yeah,
something that strikes me as as a Wolof, is the language I use when I'm there. Mandinka and Jola Funyi I hear a lot also. I can, depending on the situation,
you switch
basically,
exactly.
yeah, because those are languages of Senegal and the Casamance where I'm from, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, that's an interesting one. Now let's
So I don't
finish.
know. I mean, it's interesting. The concept of an endangered Creole is also interesting because I think in many ways languages like Nigerian Pidgin or Cameroon Pidgin are seen as language destroyers and eaters by just transferring paradigms of language endangerment from colonization scenarios in the Americas to Africa. And I think we have to be really careful with that,
Mm,
really, because I think the social linguistic situation in a country like Senegal or Nigeria or Cameroon is really different from that in Peru
yeah,
or,
yeah,
or in Canada, right? Where indigenous communities have been under permanent genocidal attack
yeah.
since 1492, and where the survival of these languages is also tied to the physical survival of its speakers,
Let's
not
speak
just, yes, not just culturally, but actually physical.
physical, yeah,
It is wrong to use the term indigenous in the countries that I am working in.
yeah. In
I don't find
francophone
it.
part, in the francophone parts, don't use the term indigène. It has a completely different connotation.
You cannot just use it like that without defining exactly what you mean, and it might not even make sense, right?
Because in the case of Senegal, there was a division between what they call les indigènes and then the French citizens. So the indigène is almost like the same for savage.
Exactly. So if you don't know that part, just like Angola, where you had indígenas
Yeah.
versus assimilados,
Yes, that's closer.
and the
Yes,
indígenas could be forced to do slave labor until 1961 in Angola.
yes,
So you rather wanted to become an assimilado, but that was very difficult. You only 1% of the population ever acceded to that status as a
yes.
lesser. So similar in Senegal. So yeah, I think what we have to see is that a lot of times languages like Ghanaian Pidgin English, Nigerian Pidgin, they just add on to existing repertoires. They don't displace other languages. They just are add-ons.
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah.
They're add-ons, you know.
Let's finish with your field work. You've s- told me about your most recent field work. You mentioned actually going to Angola recently. Can you tell us a little bit about what you've seen there? Maybe something that we don't know about as linguists or as people, interested in language, African languages. Can you share your fieldwork? You can also tell us about other fieldworks. If I have not mentioned an issue or phenomenon that you want to talk about, this is the time for it.
Thank you. Yeah, so I mean, much of my field work in the last 15 years has been centered around West Africa and the Caribbean, right? So conducted field research at the time still with a project with the late Peter Muisken in Suriname, where I worked both on Saranang, the Creole language or Creole variety of that we've talked about already, and Sarnami, which is an Indian diaspora language, which is a koine, a merger of various varieties, at the core of which is Bhojpuri, which is spoken in the eastern parts of northern India. So that was, and then of course in Ghana, Nigeria, Cameroon, and then looking also at comparative data from African languages like Ewe, Kikongo, and so forth in various parts of West Africa and Central Africa. So I've started working now in Angola because generally I'm interested in the spread of lingua francas.
Okay.
In Africa, but of course, at some point, by extrapolation, also other languages like Hindi or Indonesian, right? I have a long-standing affinity and interest in Hindi as well, and India. And I've worked on Indic languages. I've worked on Sarnami in Suriname. I've worked on Mauritian Bhojpuri. I've published quite a bit actually on Sarnami as well. On Trinidadian Bhojpuri, I collected data in 2011 on Trinidadian Bhojpuri. So some of these dynamics are really global and generalizable. So now I'm looking at Lingala. Well, Lingala is also one of these languages that emerged during the colonial period, quite late, in the 1870s and 80s, apparently from the merger of a variety of languages spoken to the north of present-day capital of DRC, Kinshasa. And the language is spreading into Angola and into neighboring countries. And this is something that has been totally unresearched.
So Lingala is spreading from the Congo, DRC,
yes,
to other neighboring countries, like even Angola, which is historically not, let's say, not French speaking, does not have that linguistic, maybe there is a linguistic, because of maybe their neighbors to a point, but
exactly. Historical shared history.
Yeah.
Also the various wars, the War of Liberation against the Portuguese, and then later the Long War, during which communities along the border, particularly in northern Angola, suffered quite a lot. There was heavy fighting there for 30 years. Fled to Congo, to DRC, particularly the so-called Bakongo peoples. So the peoples who speak varieties of Kikongo. Kikongo, another cluster.
Yeah.
And so, I was surprised by when I was in Luanda for the first time that I didn't hear an African language for 4 weeks.
Really?
I was in Luanda for 4 weeks in 2018, the first time I didn't hear a single sentence in an African language.
Why? Where were you? Where?
Because nobody around me spoke an African language.
Which social circles were you?
You don't need social circles for that. Nobody actually speaks an African language. They are still alive and vibrant in the provinces, in the interior. But in the larger cities of Angola, there's been a massive language shift to Portuguese among the younger population. Yes.
Okay, that is something.
It has a long history because Portuguese has been part of the repertoire of Luandans from Luanda, the capital, and people from Benguela for 400 years, of course, already. But it never displaced the languages. The displacement and the abandonment of African languages is a recent thing that started in earnest during the late phase of colonialism and then was accelerated through the conflicts, the various conflicts, internal displacement, population movements, and so forth. And Lingala is this kind of beacon of light because, Lingala is one of the, in my view, and I might be too generalizing here, but in my view, I think so far from what I've collected, so I collected about 30 social linguistic interviews when I was there during the summer in Lingala. So that's where I had to move fast. I had to move fast.
To move fast.
I didn't have time to lose. Like Kofi, you better speak that language, otherwise you're not going to get proper data. If you talk to them in Portuguese, what is the validity of that data, right?
Yeah.
What's the validity of that data? A lot of colleagues will probably contest me on that, but I personally have always done monolingual field research. I don't see monolingual, forget it. I've used the language repertoire that is normal for those people, or that includes the language that I'm researching. Let's say it like that.
Yeah.
So the language is one of the few languages you actually hear actively spoken, even by young people. And I was trying to find out why. And we find similar processes as with Nigerian Pidgin, Ghanaian Pidgin, West African Pidgin, and Creole, that contrary to other African languages spoken in Angola, Lingala is not indexed with backwardness, with rurality, it's indexed with city, with pop culture,
urban lifestyle,
urban lifestyle, modernity, great music,
cool lifestyle.
cool, hip, swag.
So it's a bit the wall of vibe I'm seeing here in Senegal.
These urban contact languages, which
So
are going to be more and more what African youth will be converging towards everywhere.
yes. Yes. So that's what
But
you
only
see.
in a specific region in the north. So only in the northern part of Angola where there's a historical relationship with the DRC, and it's also slightly ethnically connotated. Namely, the majority of its speakers are people of Bakongo, of Congo origin. So Bakongo as the people, not the country. The Bakongo people.
Congo as a people. Yeah.
Congo as a yes.
So the patterns that you observe in the spread of, like, the Nigerian pidgin and are the same patterns that you observe in the spread of Lingala in Angola.
They are variations of the same theme.
Of course. Yeah.
They're variations of the same theme, and probably you could transfer this to the spread of Swahili in Eastern Africa and in the Eastern DRC. You could see something similar happening with the various Nguni varieties and Sutu varieties spoken in South Africa. The kind of urban contact varieties that include English and Afrikaans in South Africa.
I mean, you can see some of the attractions,
Yes.
You can see it even in West Africa, right? How Wolof has spread over the years. Some of obviously with variation, like, there's always different context. But some of
So
the
you
patterns.
could witness that process in real time in Senegal, is what you're
Oh,
saying.
yeah, it's in my lifetime. I mean, Wolof growing, I can tell you,
Yeah.
how I saw it come in. I mean, okay,
Yes.
I grew up with it partly,
Yes.
born in the city, but grew up in villages.
Yeah.
But you could see how people, like, embrace Wolof. How do you, from adolescence, what kind of, tool it becomes? It becomes the language of dating, the language of coolness, as we just said, So you see similar, ingredients, let's say.
Yeah, it's the same with me. I could see Ghanaian Pidgin English come in. When I left Ghana, I didn't speak it. That was before puberty. And I acquired it during my visits, but my regular yearly visits to Ghana,
Yeah.
coming a teenager every year. Every year I'd show up in Ghana and then quickly linguistically catch up with my mates so I could actually, participate. And much of that language, much of that youth culture was done in Pidgin. And that's how I acquired it. So I saw it coming, just like you. I saw it coming.
Yeah.
My father always refused to speak it apart from this. But he
Yes.
also refused to speak Tree, Akan, because he belonged to the pre-spread of Akan variation as well.
Yeah.
Right? So he would always speak English, like the Queen's
Yes.
English in a taxi. He'd go into a taxi and negotiate a price. And I'd say, Papa, I beg, let me just do this for you because the price they're going to give you,
The price goes up.
with
It's
your Queen's
almost like,
English, you're not going to get far.
and it's almost like you're describing my father's linguistic choices with Wolof, where resisting Wolof for a long, long, long time. In fact, for
Yeah.
a long time, it was Mandinka when we lived in the Mandinka village.
Right.
You do not dare come home speaking Mandinka. He will send you out of the house. Come back speaking Jola.
Yola.
Yes, and then, like, in the city, it was Wolof. But in, like, that generation of people, Wolof was just kept at arm's length
Yes.
completely. And there was, like, always that stigma, you know,
Yes.
on the Wolof, let's say, but mainly as urban, like, the traders who would give you a price, like, that is like 3 times the normal price because you don't speak the language.
That's it.
So they associate dishonesty with speaking, like,
It happened to me in Luanda, you know. It's like I was with Professor Ndonga Mfua, who is you know, my collaborator and has become a friend, one of the eminent linguists of Angola, who himself is a Lingala and Kikongo speaker, and together with our colleague Alex Kobina, who you know as well, of course, professor of linguistics at the University of Sao Paulo, also Ghanaian German like me.
Yeah.
And we were sitting in a bar together with Prof. Ndonga in Palanca, which is one of the areas, outskirts of Luanda, where a lot of Lingala speakers converge. And we're sitting in this yard, you know, chilling, drinking beer, you know, eating pepper soup, you know, and all these things with nice Congolese music. It was totally different from what you would experience in the city center of Luanda, which is totally Lusitanized. There's a very Lusitanized, Portuguesified urban culture, you know, with all the trappings of Portuguese urban culture, you know, you eat with fork and knife, not with your hand, and you speak Portuguese, and right. It's I'm not making fun of it. It's
No,
really
it's
just
true. It's true. I'm
the
just
Creole.
reimagining. I'm just
Yeah, it's a
reimagining people
Creole
in
culture, you
francophone
know.
part eating with your left hand when actually in normal life you eat with your right hand.
Exactly. So it's
Mm.
actually a Creole, it's a Creole culture. It's the urban culture of coastal Angola is a Creole culture, very similar to that we find in the Caribbean, you know, and this is
Yeah.
something that helps you theoretically frame it better, as if, you know, if you go around looking for some kind of authentic, you know, in quotes, African culture in Luanda among the city population, you are not going to find it. But if you look for a Creole culture, you will find it.
You find it, okay.
Yes.
Yeah.
You know, Creole is also a cultural term, and much more so actually than a language term. We've discussed that all the time. There is no Creole language in terms of structure. There's just
Yeah.
Creole as a kind of interpretational frame for societies that emerged through the interaction, usually painful interaction of European colonialist invasions and all sorts of forms of adaptation and subversion of that invasion, right? That is
Yeah.
Creole. There's nothing
Yeah.
else,
Yeah.
right? It's invasion and resistance.
Yeah.
That's Creole.
Yeah.
There's nothing more to it.
Yeah.
And yeah. And so in that sense, I'm saying, you know, this, what we experienced the whole evening, not a word of Portuguese. Only Lingala and Kikongo in
Oh,
that place.
wow.
And it opened my eyes, our eyes, Alex as well, to a completely different reality in Rwanda. And at some point, the lady came and was selling us, you know, ground pumpkin seeds paste with some pepper, wrapped in a banana leaf in small packs. And we were drinking beer and we needed something hot, you know. So I wanted to buy for everybody. And I somehow started in Portuguese. I don't know why, because we were talking Portuguese among each other. She gave me a price, 2,000
Wow.
or something. And then she was talking to our friends who speak Lingala. And she turned back to me and she said, Olobaka Lingala, do you speak Lingala? I said, na you be Lingala. And she said, oh. And then we were talking, you know, she says, oh, so you speak Lingala. Okay, good. We were talking a bit. And then I asked her, so how much do I owe you? She says, 1,000.
No, price drop.
It was 3,000 before.
It was 3,000.
I didn't even negotiate. She just gave me the regular price.
You're one of us.
Yeah, it's just like you know, here, 1,000. Forget it.
So that's the price, tourist price against.
No, I got Luanda city price, not even tourist.
Luanda city price.
I
Yes,
got the
yes,
Luanda
yes.
non-Lingala price.
That's non. Yes, yes, yes,
I
yes.
got
No,
the
even.
non-Lingala
Yeah.
price.
Mm.
I got the price of a privileged member of the Creole Society
The
from
local
the center
community. Yes, a
of
privilege.
Luanda.
Yes.
And how I found that out is because in the social linguistic interviews, a number of people who I talked to, I asked them about their motivations. I said, why did you learn Lingala and how? And several of them said, well, you know, there was this market next door and I used to buy stuff there. And many of the traders are Lingala speakers. And I realized at some point I'm not getting good prices.
Mm.
So I started learning Lingala on the market.
Yes.
It was a question of pragmatic monetary financial management.
Yes, yes. That's how many people learn. That's how many people in Casamance started learning Wolof.
Wolof,
Because it was the language of trade. It's like the main language of trade. It's
the
always been.
domain language of trade.
And
Exactly.
there's so many
Markets
stories.
in Rwanda are dominated by, because the people with the DRC connection, and with a history of movement between these two countries, DRC and Democratic Republic of Congo and Angola, they are astute business people. They're very hardworking. The Bakongo, they're very smart. They're very cosmopolitan because they move between these countries. They speak French sometimes. They speak Portuguese. They speak Lingala. They speak Kikongo. They're very cosmopolitan, modern cosmopolitanists in a way. So they master the informal sector better than those Angolans who have never left the country, who don't have
Yes.
connections to the outside, whose main reference point might even be Portugal or something like that, rather than another African country, right? So you have these kind of dynamics playing into it.
Yeah. That's really interesting. How and how actually you can also compare some of the factors that promote the spread from different places.
Yes.
Yeah.
And it's also, as a researcher, maybe this is the time to finish this more on a personal note. I mean, it's a very, very rewarding and very rewarding experience,
Yes.
to be learning a new language while you're actually already trying to use it.
Yes.
And at the same time, you're learning it in an environment in which language competence is often indexed and coded so differently from the way it is in Europe.
Yeah.
I was telling our colleague Nico Nassenstein, who is a leading expert on Lingala and DRC as well, from the University of Cologne, whom you certainly know. Sorry,
I
University of...
met him. We examined the thesis together, actually.
Okay, Mainz. In Mainz, he studied at the university. And we had this discussion. I told him recently we met at a conference on Angolan language ecologies. And, he's been helping me a lot with literature. And, he's done research in Cabinda. So he's also doing research on the spread of Lingala in Cabinda, the northern enclave of Angola, where oil is taken out of the ground. And I told him, being a Black person and speaking a European language, not speaking a European language faultlessly while you're in Europe is always a potential face threat. Right?
Mm-hmm.
And I think one of the drivers why I learned all these European languages flawlessly, up to native language competence, is because if you speak Dutch with some accent, you are that riffraff from Northern Africa for them.
Yes.
So you get spoken down to. If you speak French with an African accent, you are one of those Senegalese or whatever.
Tell me about it. I spent 2 years in France, so I can.
Right? If you speak British in Britain, in the UK, with a West African accent, which is the most natural accent for me, but I can, of course, do British, who can't, then I'll do British just to keep my, because you're permanently under potential face threat, right?
Yeah.
But in Africa, and here I'm not saying everywhere, language is highly political, use is highly political, accents play a large role in different contexts.
Yes.
But if you are somehow outside of those dynamics and you're really coming as an outsider, the only thing you get when you're learning a language is love.
Yeah, you
get love.
Price drop is evidence, is one of them.
You're getting like, oh man, you're good. People telling you, oh, your Lingala is fluent. I know my Lingala is not fluent. But everybody's encouraging you to learn it. And so you have this very, very smooth leaning into the language. And before you know, you're speaking the language.
That is true.
And you don't even know how it happened.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, no, I get that sometimes when I even try the very little Nigerian pidgin, that I can pick up from, it always gets people going,
wow.
Yes, it does get people, even I just don't speak Nigerian pidgin at all, of course, but
Yes.
just one or two words, one proverb, and then, yeah,
Yes.
it just starts a very dynamic conversation.
Yes.
And actually, for me, it's always a way to learn more. Yeah,
Yes.
yeah,
And it's, you see, the boundary marking functions are different in many linguistic ecologies of Africa. There are boundaries, they are
yes.
marked. They are marked in different ways. And language is used in very different ways as a boundary marker. And often it's actually used as a marker of non-boundary, particularly the lingua francas,
Mm,
the neutral ground on which we converge. And so it's rewarded if you opt into the lingua franca ideology. There's a lingua franca ideology.
mhm.
And if you opt into that, then you are rewarded.
Yeah, 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 yeah,
Instant gratification, actually, for every
yeah,
word you use. Yeah.
yeah,
And that is beautiful. I mean, that's it's a different way that language is used. It has a lot to do then with you really recapturing all of us who have been battered so much by nationalist standardization ideologies and are still licking our wounds from our experience of colonial education systems, right?
Mm. Yes,
It's so liberating to speak an African lingua franca and just move into the space and just talk and joke and jest and recover your agency.
yes, yeah, yeah.
Your creativity.
Oh, we could have another hour of this, but I think
Yes.
we've done 2 hours without even realizing. It's always a pleasure to have you, to talk to you. This is the first time I've had you. Hopefully, we'll have another conversation sometime in the future
I would
about
love that.
another topic, maybe the next evolution of your field work and of your research in African Caribbean English Creoles or Creole. I should get to use Creole varieties
Yes.
just to stay on the, to be fair to the analysis that you offer here. Kofi, thank you so much for coming.
Thank you
And
very much for inviting me.
before we go, remember that there is no education without language. There is no socioeconomic development without language. There is no meaningful political stability without good language management. Remember also that children and adults can function perfectly with multiple languages. So be a proud multilingual. Subscribe to our YouTube channel, follow us on our social media platforms, and see you very soon for another episode on the Multilingual World Podcast.